days ago, I got a call from a friend of mine, and he was going to buy his very first GreenStalk. And he wanted my opinion as to whether he should buy a leaf or an original. So, what are you going to grow in it? Was my first question. Well, now this guy's an experienced gardener, okay? He said, well, I want to grow maybe some herbs. And then his wife popped in and she's like, I want to grow spinach and maybe some flowers. And then I asked him, are you planning to grow tomatoes in this GreenStalk? Oh, no, he said, those will always go in my raised beds or in my containers, large containers. In that case, I said, you want to buy a 7-tier Leaf GreenStalk. Hey folks, if we haven't met before, my name is Tara. I garden in the Bay Area, and maybe you found my video because I've got a ton of videos on how-tos and tips and tricks and hacks on how to get the most out of your GreenStalk. And I am always trying to find the most efficient solutions for growing in small spaces, and that's why I am so keen about growing in GreenStalks, because I think it really hits the mark from so many fronts. Now in the past I have made videos about the leaf versus the original tier, and just for context, the leaf tier is 7 inches tall, the original tier is 10 inches tall, so obviously the original holds a lot more soil, 1 cubic foot of soil, versus the leaf, which holds 0.75 or 3/4 of a cubic foot of soil. So quite a bit less, 25% less soil. However, there's so many things that you can grow in the GreenStalk, and the GreenStalk company actually has a list of things that grow well in the leaf versus the original. And I have been going pretty much by the book as far as what can grow in this versus that. But over the course of the years, and I've had these GreenStalks for like 5 years now, I have gained a lot of experience, and I have done a lot of experimenting on what plants I like to grow in the leaf versus in the original. And some of the findings that I've had have been pretty surprising. Now, I have made a video in the past where I talk about the 7 reasons why I like the 7-tier leaf. And today's video is going to be more of an evolution of that. I'm going to be talking about 7 more reasons why I really like the 7-tier leaf planter. And it is more due to my experience, my style of gardening that has changed and evolved over the years. So yes, this one is going to be a little bit more subjective compared to the previous one. The previous one was more by the book, what kinds of things work in the 7-tier versus the original. But today I'm going to be explaining how I have evolved and what I prefer at the end of the day. And caveat, it may be different than what you prefer. So your climate, your conditions, your space, your style of gardening may be very different than mine. The plants you prefer may be very different than mine. So take it with a grain of salt and put your spin on it. But I'm hoping that this will help you kind of think through the way that I thought through what I want to be buying more of going forward. And guess what? I'm going to be buying more of the 7-tier leaf planter next time. So over here, I've got a very heavily annotated couple of note cards that I cut out of the GreenStalk book. And this basically is the list of things that grow well in the leaf versus the original. And right off the bat, you can see that the leaf has 33 plants and the original has 21 plants that GreenStalk recommends. So there are more varieties of plants that can grow in the leaf versus the original. Now, keep in mind that whatever can grow in the leaf can also grow in the original. Obviously, the original is bigger, but it can grow everything that can grow in the leaf. So that's the big caveat over here. But I am not looking to maximize the amount of soil that I'm using. I'm actually trying to economize on that. And that's why I'm looking at this as in this I definitely want to grow in the leaf versus what from this original list can I actually grow in the leaf. So let's look at it with my annotations, and at the end of the day, it comes down to what you really want to grow, the majority of things that you want to grow, and that is going to help you decide what kind of planter you want to get. Let's look through my list, shall we? All right, so first on the list is cabbage, and let's do cabbage and cauliflower together because the growth characteristics are very similar. Actually, let me show you the cabbage that's growing in my GreenStalk. Now my GreenStalks are in transition from cool weather to warm weather. So you will see a lot of empty pockets and things that I am starting to prep for my warm season crops like my cucumbers, my beans, etc. But there's plenty of beautiful winter vegetables. Look at this kale, it's gorgeous. And of course the onions are not ready to harvest, but they are growing into monsters, you guys. I'm going to be getting some real nice onions. First time I'm growing onions in the GreenStalk and I'm really impressed. But I digress. We were talking about cabbage. Okay, so this is the cabbage, and for me cabbage is always hit or miss. I've never grown a large cabbage in the GreenStalk. On the other hand, I grow beautiful cabbages in my planters, and for the GreenStalk the head is not formed too firmly. The plant, this is a smallish kind of plant, but sometimes the plants get too big, and overall it makes the GreenStalk look a little bit lopsided. And if you know me, if you watch my videos before, I do want beautiful GreenStalks, and having lopsided GreenStalks kind of affects my sense of balance. So yeah, cabbages don't grow that well for me in the GreenStalk, and this is an ornamental cabbage which is bolting, as you can see. But yeah, overall cabbages and cauliflowers, same thing, just don't look great in the GreenStalk and don't produce that well. So they are a no-no for me. I will only be growing those in my planters. Next on the list is cantaloupe. Now, cantaloupe is an interesting story actually for me. So bear with me if you watch my videos where I've talked about this before, but I have grown the biggest, best, sweetest cantaloupe I have ever grown in my GreenStalk. And I'm saying this across my garden, and I've got a fairly large garden. I've never been able to grow such wonderful cantaloupes as I have in the GreenStalk. Let me correct myself. Cantaloupe, because I grew one cantaloupe. It was a very sickly looking plant, to tell you the truth, and it put all its energy into that one cantaloupe. And the cantaloupe was the biggest I've ever grown. It was the sweetest I've ever grown. It was just amazing. I was so proud of it. But that plant was not a healthy plant. And as a result of it, I just don't think it's worth growing cantaloupes. Just for that one cantaloupe to have a struggle through with a sickly plant was just not worth it for me. I put a lot of attention into giving it fertilizer and all of that. It just didn't help. Cantaloupes are just not the right candidate. Now, there may be certain varieties, smaller varieties that I can in the future try to grow, but there are so many other things to choose from. And so cantaloupe is going to be struck off my list, at least for a little bit. Next on the list is Coleus. Let me show you some of my Coleus. Now, Coleus grows beautifully in the GreenStalk. I have got several different varieties of Coleus. I started all of these from seed and they all look lovely. And yes, they are growing in original tiers over here. But you know what? I have grown Coleus very successfully in the leaf tier. Now, I do not let my Coleus grow super large and leggy. I tend to be very good at pruning and staying on top of it. I like nice bushy Coleus. So for me, I actually can keep my Coleus at the right size and grow it in the leaf tier very successfully. Coleus has pretty shallow roots, so I don't have to worry about it kind of trying to compete and things like that. It's always on the surface. As long as I give it a little bit of nitrogen-rich fertilizer, it does very well for me in the leaf tier. So that's where I'll be growing it. The next on the list is corn, and they recommend dwarf corn. And I'm actually going to tackle corn and okra together. They're both on the list over here. Okra also, they recommend the dwarf variety. Now, I do not like to grow plants in the GreenStalk that have a tall, lanky habit. If you watched my videos before, you may remember my glacier blue and white combo GreenStalk where I've got lovely painted daisies but long, lanky stems. They are not just a good look for me. Again, I'm being subjective over here. You may be completely different. You may enjoy that look, but I just don't like long, leggy things growing from my GreenStalk because the GreenStalk really shows the entire length of the plant, and for me, that's not a good look. Plus, corn, it does much better when it is grown in kind of like a block because of the pollination. I would imagine that it might be a little bit tricky to pollinate corn in the GreenStalk. You may have to do hand pollination. For me, it's just not worth the work. And if I don't like the look of it either, and I've got the space to grow it in a block if I choose to, why am I growing corn in the GreenStalk? Similarly, why am I growing okra in the GreenStalk? I don't like the look of it. I'd rather grow it in some of my other planters. Plus, frankly, I am not an expert in growing okra. Our climate over over here is too dry. Okra requires a lovely humid climate in order to thrive. So I think all of those factors, I just avoid okra, and even if I do want to grow it, I'll grow it in one of my other planters, not the GreenStalk. The next are a couple of ornamentals. They've got Dianthus and they've got Dusty Miller. Now, Dianthus, there's different varieties. I would imagine they're talking about the shorter varieties. I'm actually growing Sweet William in one of my GreenStalks and in the leaf tier, and that's where I would rather grow it. Dusty Miller, I may try growing it. It's a perennial. It would probably do better in a planter in ground somewhere, and I've actually got it growing in ground in my garden, so not really too keen about growing Dusty Miller in the GreenStalk. Oh, I missed one over here, cucumber, and I'll actually do cucumber and eggplant together because they are actually two of the exceptions to the rule, I would say, that I've got, where I will be growing those in my original. Yes, GreenStalk does recommend that you grow it in the original, but I'm always trying to find out whether I can actually squeeze it into a leaf tier and get more plants that way versus wasting an original GreenStalk tier on these things. But eggplant and cucumber, definitely in the original tier. Now the next is Leeks. Now this is something that I've never grown in the GreenStalk, and I actually might try growing it in the GreenStalk. I can see why it is a better candidate for the original tier, because Leeks, you got to bury the stem nice and deep so you can get those nice thick white stems. And given my success with onions, though by the way, onions I am growing in the leaf tier, which is actually what GreenStalk recommends, but leeks you would need to grow in the original tier because you want to maximize the length of the white stem. And I actually might try growing leeks in the GreenStalk original next year. Then they've got mums on the list. I've got mums all over my garden. I'm not going to waste a GreenStalk original tier on mums, plus it's a perennial. And then nasturtiums. I definitely wouldn't be growing nasturtiums in my original tier. If I had the choice, I would definitely grow that in the leaf tier. Nasturtiums have super shallow roots, so you just do this and they come right out. And plus I'm growing the bush variety of nasturtiums going forward. I think the larger varieties, the ones that cascade over, they are just too big and too unwieldy for the GreenStalk. So nasturtiums, bush varieties, leaf tier for me. All right, let's go through the rest real quick. Peppers, I grow smaller varieties, leaf tier, not original. Petunias, I won't be growing those in the GreenStalk. Their stems are just way too brittle, and yeah, so skip that. Potatoes, let me actually show you my potatoes. So first I wanted to show you the potatoes that are growing in my grow bags that I've put in these little milk crates over here. Now they've got a lot of insect damage, but they're growing pretty decent. In fact, they're reaching the point where they are getting very close to being ready to harvest. In fact, I'm seeing some of them starting to fall over. But let me show you the same potato stalk that I put at the same time in the GreenStalk. By the way, this is not the first time that I'm growing GreenStalk potatoes unsuccessfully. I don't know what I'm doing wrong. So if you have any tips for me, do share them, but let me show you my potatoes. Yeah, they clearly have some disease. I don't know what it is, but all of them are not doing well. And then I've got sweet potatoes in the upper tier over here also not doing well. So in general, I just don't think it's worth the effort growing GreenStalk potatoes. I'm going to be growing them like I did either in ground or in grow bags. And I just showed you those sweet potatoes. Look at them over here. I mean, it's still very early in the season, but look how nice and lush and beautiful they look in this container versus they're not doing so well in the GreenStalk. Yeah, sweet potatoes have that lovely sort of vining habit, and I think they would look gorgeous if they grew well in the GreenStalk just from the appearance perspective. But as far as the amount of harvest, you guys tell me. I've not had a very good harvest. I've tried growing sweet potatoes as well as regular potatoes. Neither of them have resulted in a great harvest in the GreenStalk, either in the original or in the leaf tier. So I'm going to skip it going forward. A few more items over here. Watermelon. Watermelon, definitely you want to grow in the original tier. You do not want to try to grow that in the leaf tier. That has long, thirsty roots. It's a heavy feeder. You definitely want to give it as much soil as possible. And you also want to grow a small variety. Don't try to grow any large watermelons in your GreenStalk. I'm actually going to be growing a variety called Mini Love this year. I'm really excited growing it for the first time. I've actually got an arch over my GreenStalk. Let me show you. Yeah, so this arch over my green stalk, I actually picked this up on Amazon, and I can put a link in the caption if you're interested where I got it from. But this is where I'm going to be growing my watermelons, my mini love watermelons. So let's see how that does this year. And then the last two, tomato and zucchini slash squash. Let's start with tomatoes. Now, I prefer to grow tomatoes in large containers, like really large containers, like whiskey barrel sized containers. And I'm talking about the large indeterminate tomato varieties. But even the smaller ones, like the dwarf tomatoes, which grow 3-4 feet tall, I prefer to grow them either in my raised beds or in containers. They just get really large. So you may think that they're dwarf tomatoes, okay, they're only whatever, 3 feet tall, but they also get really wide if you give them the space to grow. So while you can grow in the green stalk, I think that you would, if you're looking to maximize production, you're better off growing it in a container. If you don't have a choice, of course, please, by all means, grow in the green stalk whenever you can. But if you do have a choice of growing tomatoes in containers, that would be my preference to do. Now, the exception is micro tomatoes. So the little ones that grow no more than like 6-8 inches, they grow phenomenally well in the green stalk. And guess what? They grow phenomenally well in the leaf tier. So yet another check mark for that leaf tier. And then finally, zucchini and squash. I cannot grow those in my green stalk, mainly because they are out here in the open. I've got oak trees in my backyard, and I'll just have one word that I'll share with you: squirrels. Yeah. Okay, you get it. So that's the list, the original list. And now, of course, the other list is the 7-tier Leaf GreenStalk, which has a really long list of 33 items. But now let's talk about the 7 reasons why I personally prefer the leaf tier over the original and why I'll be buying more of those. All right, I brought you here next to my blueberry planter so you can also appreciate it while I sit over here and tell you about reason number 1 why I prefer the leaf planter. And that is big crops, even though they can grow in the GreenStalk original, big crops belong in raised beds and planters. The GreenStalks will shine at what they do best, and for me, that is not with huge, large, expansive crops. Those will go in my raised beds, in my other planters, period. Reason number 2 is less space and less soil waste. Now, in the same footprint, the GreenStalk 7-tier leaf can house 42 plants. That's 7 times 6. Versus the original, it's 5 times 6. So that's 30 plants. Plus, on top of that, the leaf tier takes only 3/4 of the soil that the original takes. So it's less expensive. It's less heavy to lift. There's so many reasons why I like the leaf tier better than the original tier. I'm going to take you over to my mini greenhouse to talk about reason number 3. And reason number 3 is less plant waste. Let me show you to explain. So this greenhouse is my little overflow greenhouse, and I've already got a lot of my plants in ground, but I grow a lot of seedlings, you guys, every year. And all of these need to find a home. And guess what? The GreenStalk, with all its pockets, it can provide a lot of space for these plants. And even if they're not providing the maximum production, I still like to think that some production is better than dumping plants in the compost. So yeah, the GreenStalk is a great overflow area for a lot of my plants. And frankly, a lot of these, like lettuce and even some eggplants, and definitely peppers, and oh yeah, cilantro, all of those can grow very easily in the leaf tier. Yeah, for the amount of plants that I grow, 42 pockets definitely beats 30 pockets any day. So the next reason has to do with a choice that I have made this summer. I'm going to be growing more of the single plant towers. So say, for example, over here, I'm growing beans, bush beans, and I'll be growing them in succession. But because I'm using the original tiers, it's less plants. Frankly, bush beans grow well in leaf tiers, and I could have so much more plants if I was growing in the leaf tier versus the original tier. So it's kind of a bummer that I have to quote unquote waste the original tier, especially on something like bush beans, which I'll be growing very quickly in succession. And I would really have preferred to grow this in the leaf, but I don't have any available leaves. The next has to do with theme towers. So we talked about the single plant towers, but theme towers is one of the things I want to do this season. So say, for example, I want to grow a salsa garden, and that would be like micro tomatoes and maybe garlic shoots, green onions, maybe some variety of pepper, sweet pepper, a short variety. I think that would look exceptionally sweet in a leaf planter versus an original planter. In fact, I could pack a lot more plants for visual impact. Again, visual is just so important to me. It needs to be beautiful in the green stock, and I think theme planters would look really nice in the leaf planter versus the original, which are kind of bigger, wider. I think theme planters would look a lot better in the leaf planter, but that may be just me. I'm also thinking about doing a thematic herb garden, maybe a tea garden. All of those things would work really great in the leaf planter. Why waste an original planter on it? One more thing that I do want to continue to grow through my summer is certain root vegetables. Maybe not sweet potatoes and potatoes, but beets, you guys, and onions. Oh my gosh, they did exceptionally well in my green stock. I'm actually even thinking about pushing one of my green stalks into the shade and growing radishes, because radishes do super well in the green stock. And guess what? They all grow really well in the leaf planter. So yeah, root vegetables for me, definitely leaf planter. And then the seventh reason, flowers. Let me show you. I'm so glad the razzleberry is back on sale for Mother's Day, which is going on right now if you're watching this video in the May timeframe. But flowers grow really well in the green stock, and I've got several of them dedicated to flowers. But guess what? Because when I bought the razzleberry, it was buy one, get one, and it was the original tier. I am, again, quote unquote, wasting an original tier with that much soil on flowers, which can grow really well in the leaf tier. Don't you love the backdrop of the snapdragons behind my razzleberries? Oh my gosh, they are looking so gorgeous. Yeah, so in this blueberry planter, I've got tons of pansies and creeping verbena growing. You may not want to grow poppies in the green stock, but yeah, the pansies grow super well in the leaf tier. Let me show you a few more. I'm actually really liking the fact that you can stack the leaf tier with the original tier. It creates kind of an interesting look, I think. So yeah, visual appeal. And of course, I am growing petunias here. I'm growing nasturtiums. I am growing creeping verbena. I am growing some kind of chives over here. I am growing, oh, so many different varieties. This, I think, is Sweet William. I am waiting for it to bloom. I hope it will bloom this year. Yeah, the pink one is Leaf GreenStalk, actually. And you can see I'm growing nasturtiums. These are the bush variety nasturtiums. They're growing quite well in here. This is Erigeron, I think is the name. I love the ethereal look of the flowers. More verbena. You can grow just tons and tons of different types of flowers in the leaf tier, you guys. You do not need a huge original tier to grow flowers. Most of them have shallow roots and they grow really well. Now, as these cool weather flowers are slowly growing out of their prime, I'm going to be replacing them with, guess what? Thumbelina zinnias. I can't wait. So I hope I've given you some insight into my thinking as to why I think the 7-tier green stock is actually extremely versatile, and in some ways I prefer it much more than the original green stock, though I love them both. And my very first green stock was a 7-tier. I got it to grow strawberries, and this year I have finally succeeded in growing sweet strawberries. I've grown large strawberries, but I've never been able to grow really sweet tasting strawberries, and this year I did a few things different, and it seems to be paying off, and I'll put a link to the video so you can see what I did different. But back to my friend and his very first GreenStalk, I'm feeling very confident in recommending the 7-tier leaf. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Are you a 7-tier leaf person, or do you just prefer to get the original and get it done with? And by the way, I am a GreenStalk affiliate, so if you could use my link and my code GREENLOVE10 to get $10 off your $75 purchase, I would really appreciate it. Until next time, live green and love your greens.